Okay, so you know how some people say learning a language doesn't have to be such a drag? Like it can actually be, almost fun.
Yeah, almost like a superpower you can develop.
Totally. And that's what we're going to unpack today, the Michel Thomas Method. The reviews call it works like a dream. Hugely inspiring.
Bold claims.
Right. So we got to dive into this Learning Revolution book by Jonathan Solity and see what the hype is all about, right?
Yes, do it. It really flips the script on how we think about learning, especially languages.
For sure. But first, who is this Michel Thomas guy?
Oh, fascinating life. Picture this. Escaping Nazi-occupied Europe, talk about a crash course in resilience.
Wow. Yeah, that'll change your perspective.
Definitely shaped his views on education. Anyway, he gets to the U.S. in 47, clean slate, and gets into teaching languages. But not just any old way.
He spent like 25 years developing this method.
Exactly. This wasn't some fly-by-night thing. This was his life's work.
And all those reviews, painless, effortless, impressive results, they're talking about this method. So what's the big secret?
No secret, just solid psychology. We're talking Piaget, Vygotsky, Bruner heavy hitters, and how people learn.
Oh yeah, college psych flashbacks. Refresh my memory.
Piaget stages of development, kids learn best at their own pace. Michel Thomas applied that to language. Start where you are, not where some textbook says you should be.
Makes sense. Cramming never worked for me either. What about Vygotsky?
He's the zone of proximal development guy, the ZPD, that sweet spot where you're ready to learn something new but need a little help to get there.
A guide, like a coach.
Exactly, scaffolding. It's not about struggling alone, it's about having an expert there to guide you.
I'm liking this already. And Bruner, how does he fit in?
Bruner was all about active learning. Start with concrete ideas and move towards the abstract.
So like if you're learning to cook, you wouldn't start with beef Wellington, right? You begin with something simple like scrambled eggs.
Precisely. You get comfortable with the basics, then you get fancy later. It's about building on what you know.
Okay, so we've got Piaget, Vygotsky, Bruner, all about understanding the learner's experience.
Exactly. And Michel Thomas took those insights and made them practical for language learning. But it wasn't just developmental psychology. He was also into instructional psychology and rational analysis.
Those sound kind of complicated. How would you explain that to someone who, hasn't been reading all this stuff?
Basically, it's about how the way information is structured affects learning. The idea is, to teach most effectively, you gotta mirror how our brains already work.
So no more endless verb conjugations and vocabulary lists.
That's the revolution. This method ditches the stuff that makes learning a language tedious and painful.
Now we're talking. Okay, but how does he actually USE all these theories in like a real world situation?
One key principle is Pareto's law, the 80-20 principle.
Isn't that the thing where like 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts? But how does that apply to languages?
Think of it this way. Just a handful of core words and grammar rules make up most everyday conversations, right? Michel Thomas figured out how to pinpoint that crucial 20% that unlocks fluency. It's about working smarter, not harder.
So instead of learning like every word under the sun, you're laser focused on the most important ones.
Gotcha. But how does he teach those words? Does he just throw them at you and say, good luck?
Not at all. There's a method to the madness, a very intentional progression built on some really cool principles. For instance, there's this one he calls interleaved learning. Basically, you're always mixing new stuff with what you've already learned.
So you're not just piling new info on top, you're weaving it all together.
Exactly. And it just makes sense, right? Reinforces those core concepts as you go.
So it's like building a house brick by brick.
Exactly. And Solity gives a great example of this in the book, Table 8.1. It's for Spanish. And you can see how they introduce new words alongside familiar ones.
So you're constantly practicing and reinforcing instead of just memorizing a list. Exactly. And this keeps things interesting too. You're not just drilling the same stuff over and over.
That's one way to kill the joy of learning for sure. So what other cool tricks does he have up his sleeve?
Okay, get this. Minimal differences. So he teaches by highlighting subtle differences between concepts.
Okay. Give me an example.
All right, think about Spanish. Ser and estar both mean to be, right? But they're used in different ways.
Right. Like I am happy versus I am at the park. Different vibes.
Exactly. Or Solity talks about how Michel Thomas used this to teach adjective endings in French.
So instead of just memorizing a bunch of random rules, you're actually understanding the the WHY behind them.
Yes, and that makes it so much easier to actually use the language. You're not just parroting phrases.
It's like the difference between knowing the ingredients of a cake and actually understanding how to bake one.
Perfect analogy. And he's very careful to only teach one new skill at a time.
So you're never in over your head. You're building understanding one step at a time. This is so smart. It's like he reverse engineered how our brains learn best, right? But it seems kind of radical, challenging the traditional way of teaching, right?
Totally. Like, for one thing, look at the role of the teacher. Michel Thomas basically says it's the teacher's responsibility to make sure learning happens, not the students.
Whoa, really? That's a big shift. Usually it's all about the student's effort, right?
Yeah, but Michel Thomas is like, nope. The teacher has to create an environment where learning is almost effortless.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Imagine, no more feeling stupid for not getting it. What else did he turn on his head?
Memorization. He was totally against rote learning.
So no more flashcards and all-nighters before a test.
The goal is to make that stuff obsolete. He wanted learning to be this natural process of discovery, not a memorization marathon.
This is blowing my mind. It's so different from how most of us learned in school. Okay, last question before we go on. What about making mistakes? How did he view errors?
That's another thing that makes his method so cool. He saw mistakes as, like, valuable feedback, opportunities for the teacher to adjust their approach, not as some kind of failure on the student's part.
That's huge. Takes all the pressure off, right? You're free to experiment, to play with the language without being afraid of getting it wrong.
Right. It creates this really supportive learning environment. And he used to compare it to, like, a tennis coach. A good coach doesn't yell at you for missing a shot. They analyze your swing, they adjust your grip, they help you improve.
Okay, that makes total sense. So it's a collaboration, the teacher and student working together towards this common goal. Man, this all sounds amazing. But if it's so effective, why isn't everyone using it? Like, why isn't this the standard in every school?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And Solity actually addresses this in the book. He says, real educational change, lasting change, it's slow, it's a process.
So people are just resistant to new ideas, even if they work.
There's definitely some of that. Comfort zones, We stick with what we know, even if it's not the best way.
Oh yeah, we humans love our routines. But there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Think about what this method requires. You need really skilled teachers who can adapt to each student. It's not like you can just, like, plug in a Michel Thomas CD and walk away.
That's true. It's not just about the method itself. It's about the people who are implementing it.
Yeah.
So are you saying we need a whole system overhaul?
In a way, yeah. It'd be a huge investment in teacher training and developing a new approach to education from the ground up.
And that's not something every school system is willing or able to do, right?
Sadly, no. It's like this catch-22. To do it right, you need teachers who are trained in this method, but to train teachers, you need buy-in from the whole system. It's a challenge, for sure. But imagine if we could crack this code. Imagine if learning a language wasn't a chore anymore, but like this fun, almost effortless experience.
Oh, man, tell me about it. Would have loved that in high school. Okay, one final thought before we move on. Do you think Michel Thomas just wanted to, like, teach languages? Or was it something bigger?
I think for him, this was always bigger than just languages. Remember, he called it a learning revolution, and he truly believed this approach could transform how we learn anything.
Wow, that's quite a legacy to leave behind. We've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? We talked about the man, the method, the challenges, but I think the biggest takeaway for me, and hopefully for you listening, is this. Learning doesn't have to be like one size fits all, right? There are different ways to do it to make it actually enjoyable, even exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, if it's so good, why isn't everyone learning this way?
Right. What's the holdup?
Well, people want quick fixes, but real change in education, it takes time. It takes commitment.
Yeah, it's easier to stick with what you know, even if it's not really working.
Exactly. We crave that familiarity, but maybe, just maybe, this deep dive will get people thinking, hey, there's another way.
That's the hope, right? To spark some curiosity about learning. Maybe even inspire some folks to try something new.
That's what we want. That's how revolutions start. You challenge the old ways and imagine something better.
And who knows? Maybe this way of learning, it's not just about languages, right? Maybe it's a whole new way of thinking about education, about how we unlock our potential.
I think Michel Thomas would like that.
Me too. Well, that's our deep dive into the Michel Thomas Method. We covered a lot of ground, but hopefully this sparks some new ideas for you. Maybe even a little revolution in your own learning journey. Until next time.